Alright, this is a video lecture discussing the cardiovascular system. This is week 3 of our class, and our lecture notes packet is not in order with our new textbook, so I'm going to have to ask you to page forward in your notes packet to page 233. That's where the notes begin on the cardiovascular system. So it's chapter 5 and 6 in our textbook. But in the older edition, when I made this packet, it was later in the book, so we have to page 233, and that's the cardiovascular system. So when you look at the cardiovascular system, it's basically a muscular pump and its associated blood vessels for carrying the blood. So it's made up of two major structures, the blood vessels that we find throughout the body, and the heart. The heart is simply a double-sided muscular pump to deliver blood, nutrients, and remove wastes from the tissues. So we're going to start off by talking about the blood vessels. There's different types of blood vessels in the body, and the smallest of those vessels are the capillaries. So we have the arteries, the large arteries that carry blood away from the heart. That is a hard and fast rule when looking at vessels in the body. Arteries always carry blood away from the heart. And then they branch into smaller vessels called arterioles, and then finally to the capillaries. And the capillaries are the smallest of the vessels, and that's where the exchange occurs with the tissues of the body. And then connecting to those capillaries are the receiving vessels of used blood from those tissues, and that's the venules. And the venules branch to become larger veins, and veins carry blood to the heart. So arteries carry blood away from the heart, veins carry blood to the heart. So if you look at blood vessels, they have some things in common. The inside of blood vessels is called the lumen. That's the hollow interior portion of the blood vessel where we find the blood. And then the endothelium is just the cells that line the lumen. So all blood vessels have an inner lining called the endothelium. And the type of tissue that makes up that endothelium is simple squamous epithelium. So it's a very thin one layer of cells. It's a delicate layer, the endothelium, and this is the layer that can build up with fatty deposits and cholesterol and lead to blood clots in people with high cholesterol or lipid levels. So that's the endothelium. Endo meaning inside, so it's the inner lining of our vessels. And then the vessels differ a little bit in their structure. So this is a picture from your textbook that talks about the different vessels and looks at them. And I'm going to go to a colored picture from your textbook. And this picture I'm going to show you here is on page 93 of your book. It's the kind of blown up view of the different vessels. So when you look at these vessels, the arteries, we said, carry blood away from the heart. Arteries have a very muscular layer, so they carry blood under high pressure from the heart. So this is the muscular layer. It's much thicker compared to veins. This is a vein here, shown in blue. So arteries have a thick muscular layer, and they have a smaller lumen. The inside portion where the blood is smaller compared to a vein. So veins also have a muscular layer. We can see that here in red. That's the muscular layer. It's thinner, but the diameter, the lumen, is much larger in veins. So veins can hold a lot of blood, and most of the blood in your body is actually in the veins, not in the arteries. Veins also have valves. Valves prevent the blood from flowing backward away from the heart, because the job of veins is to carry blood to the heart. So that carries blood toward the heart, and those veins prevent that backflow, which is very important. So looking at the arteries compared to the veins, then let's just review what we just talked about. Veins have a higher volume of blood because of that large diameter, and arteries have a thicker, more muscular wall to carry that blood under pressure. The job of the arteries are to squeeze that blood into the capillary bed, and the capillaries are single-celled or single layer of cells, the endothelium, which are leaky and allows nutrients to leave the capillaries and enter the tissue. So this is a capillary bed, and scattered among these capillaries are going to be the different cells of the body, the brain cells, muscle cells, digestive tract cells, any cells in the body that need oxygen and nutrients are going to be supplied by this capillary bed. So when you look at the blood vessels, then just keep in mind that differences between arteries and veins. There's 3 layers that make up arteries and veins. There's the endothelium, which is simple squamous epithelium, here and here. And then we have the muscular layer, which is smooth muscle that can contract or relax depending on what we want to do with the blood flow. And then we have the outer layer, the connective tissue outer layer. So there's different layers of these blood vessels, and they each have different functions. But capillaries only have an endothelium. They only have simple squamous epithelium. They're very thin wall vessels because their job is to exchange nutrients and gases and wastes with the tissues. So I have a little video here to show you what this blood flow looks like in the body, looking at capillaries. Very friendly now, is it? Okay, well, we'll just go like this. Here we go. So, looking at capillary flow, again, we have arteries branching to arterioles and leading to capillaries. This blood flow here. Here is an arteriole, and here's our capillary bed. So when we have normal blood flow, we have good flow of blood vessels into the capillary bed. But if we have something called vasoconstriction, that means our blood vessels, our arterioles, are constricting, the diameter is getting smaller, and that slows the flow of blood into the capillary bed. So the flow of blood into a capillary bed is called perfusion. So if we have low perfusion, that means we have slow flow of blood vessels into the capillary bed because of these arterioles being constricted or having a smaller diameter, which means the smooth muscle is contracting, making that diameter smaller. And this happens when we don't need a lot of blood flow to a particular area. For example, if you're exercising, the arterioles to your digestive tract are going to constrict, and you're going to have less blood flow to the digestive tract, and the arterioles leading to your muscles are going to dilate to have increased blood flow to the working muscles. So it depends which tissues are active, which if we're going to be in a vasoconstriction to slow the blood flow, or if we're going to be in vasodilation with the arterioles to increase the blood flow. So this is vasoconstriction. You can see how slow that blood flow is. If we dilate the blood vessels, that increases the blood flow. And this is important for people with cardiovascular disease. Sometimes the coronary arteries serving the heart muscle are narrowed because of cardiovascular disease, and as a result they'll take nitro under the tongue, and that vasodilates their arterioles, leading to the capillary beds of the coronary arteries. So that increases blood flow to the heart muscle and reduces chest pain. So that's the capillaries. The capillaries, again, are the sites of exchange. The red blood cells, the white blood cells, they don't leave the capillaries. They remain inside, but only the nutrients and the gases and ions and very small substances dissolved in the plasma can leave the capillary and enter the tissues. So again, arteries are thick muscular vessels. They carry blood away from the heart. They have that inner lining, they have the muscular, smooth muscle middle layer, then they have that outer layer of connective tissue. Arteries are where we get our pulses. So in the lab this week, you're going to look at different pulse sites, and the pulse is just a pressure wave generated by the heart, and it's found within the arteries. So anytime you're checking a pulse, whether it's in the wrist or in the neck, you're looking at pressure waves in an artery. And that pulse rate, that pressure wave, is generated every time the heart contracts, so we can figure out heart rate by measuring pulse rate. So here's an example of a healthy artery that's open and blood is allowed to flow, and here is one that's narrowed by plaque or high cholesterol. So some people, that don't watch their cholesterol levels over as they age, and they have a high-fat diet, end up having these narrowed arteries, and that eventually will form a blood clot because the endothelial lining of this vessel is damaged, and that clot breaks free and gets caught in a smaller arterial or capillary, and then that tissue is deprived of oxygen. So if that clot gets stuck in a coronary artery, that's what a heart attack is, and if that clot gets stuck in an artery of the brain, that's what a stroke is. So again, we talked about vasoconstriction is when the smooth muscle layer contracts, and that narrows the lumen and that reduces blood flow. Vasodilation is when the smooth muscle layer in an artery relaxes, and that increases blood flow. So some terms that you should be aware of. And an aneurysm, maybe you've heard of that before, that's when a blood vessel breaks. So when a blood vessel breaks and due to being weak from chronic high blood pressure, the blood vessel bursts and there's massive loss of blood, and that can be deadly, especially if it's in a large artery like the abdominal aorta that runs down from the bottom of the chest to the hip area. There's a lot of blood flow going through that vessel. And people who are at risk for aneurysms are people who drink a lot of alcohol over a lifetime and smokers. So here's an example of an aneurysm that occurred in the brain. We can see there's a vessel that broke here and there's large pooling of blood. So again, arterioles are smaller arteries that branch, that feed into capillary beds. So they serve the capillary bed, and they have small little control vessels around them to control the flow of blood into a capillary bed. And those are called precapillary sphincters. We'll talk about that a little later in the lecture. So capillaries are these microscopic blood vessels. They are porous. Things can leave the blood and enter the tissues. So they have small spaces between their cells for that exchange to occur. And they have, again, these precapillary sphincters, these small little muscular structures that regulate the flow into a capillary bed. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But these capillaries, again, they have just one layer of cells, simple squamous epithelium, with spaces between those cells for exchange. So we don't see red blood cells or white blood cells leaving the capillaries because they're too large. They remain in the capillary bed. Only, gases, nutrients, hormones, ions can leave the capillary and enter the tissue cells. So there's a special control mechanism called a precapillary sphincter. And if you go to your textbook, there's a picture of this precapillary sphincter on page, let's see, well, I guess there isn't a good picture of the sphincter, but there's these small little control structures that contract and prevent the flow of blood into the capillary, and they're right here. You can see they're kind of small. They're wrapped around this capillary bed here. Those are the sphincters. When they relax, blood flows through the capillary bed easily, feeding the tissues, and when they constrict, blood flow slows. So it just depends on which tissue in the body is working the hardest. Those sphincters are going to relax and increase blood flow. For example, if you're exercising, the sphincters of the capillary beds feeding your muscles are going to relax. The digestive tract, those sphincters would contract when you're exercising because we don't want to have a lot of blood flow to the digestive tract when we're exercising. And when we're relaxing, the opposite is true. We would have a dilated or relaxed sphincters going to the capillary beds of the digestive tract when we're resting. So if we look at the velocity of flow, we can see that the velocity kind of goes up and down here with the pressure waves in the aorta and the arterioles, and then that blood flow drops as we go through the capillaries because we want to slow the exchange between the blood and the tissue. So the velocity is very slow. The speed of blood flow through the capillary slows down as it passes through those small tiny vessels, and then it speeds up again as it returns to the heart via the venules and the veins. So again, looking at veins and venules, they carry blood back to the heart. So veins carry blood to the heart. They have the same 3 layers as we saw in the arteries. However, they have a larger lumen, like we said, and they also are reservoirs for blood volume, which basically means that because of that large lumen, most of our blood is in the veins. At any one time, most of our blood supply is in the veins because of that large diameter. So what helps the blood flow back to the heart through the veins are a couple of things. Contraction of our skeletal muscles. So by just contracting your muscles, you're returning blood through your veins to the heart. That's why when people are standing up at a wedding or standing at attention for a long time, soldiers in boot camp, it's important that they contract their muscles and kind of go up on their toes a little bit and come back down and contract those leg muscles to get that blood flow back to the heart, because that's what helps blood flow in the veins is the contractions of nearby skeletal muscles. That's why we have our patients stand at the bedside when they're laying in bed a long time. We want to help that blood flow get back to the heart. Or if they're really ill, we'll put those leg squeezers on the lower legs to help that blood flow come back if they're not able to contract their muscles on their own. And every time you take a deep breath, every time you inhale largely, that lowers the pressure in your abdomen and draws the blood to your heart. And then again, we have those valves in the veins that prevent the backflow. So it's really important for good blood flow to prevent blood from settling in the legs is to contract your muscles. Like if you're in a long flight, for example, overseas, you want to get up and walk around and you want to take some deep breaths. That's going to help that blood flow go back to the heart and not settle in your feet and cause swelling. And for some people, it even can cause blood clots if they don't move that blood around enough. So, walking and taking deep breaths is a good way to get that blood flowing. So this is just an example. If we have a relaxed blood flow, we can see that the blood fills the vessels and the valves close. And then as we contract the calf muscle, it moves that blood upward toward the heart. So we'll stop here and let you spend a little time reviewing blood flow and some of the structures of the vessels.